welcome to the show. My name is Charles. I'm going to be your host today, along with Emily from Foxit, who is a product manager. She is also going to be one of our hosts. Today's guest brings a clear-eyed perspective to a conversation that's often clouded by hype. Brian Root is a fractional chief product officer and product strategist with deep leadership experience at Amazon, Walmart Labs, and several startups. He helps companies move beyond reactive development to build thoughtful, user-centered products with intention. Through his work at Rooted in Product, Brian advises product teams on how to stay focused on customer needs, business context, and real strategy, using AI as a tool, not as a substitute for leadership. His approach is practical, grounded, and built on the belief that innovation still starts with human insight. If you're curious about what it really means to build with purpose in the age of AI, then this episode is definitely going to be for you. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Charles. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so you said that AI is a tool, not a person. And from other guests I've had, we've had plenty of people say that AI is definitely starting to feel more human, more like a person. People are talking to it like a person and getting responses. But it's still a tool. It's not actually a person. What do you necessarily mean by that in the context of product leadership specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, I think, just on the face of it, why we're even, having that conversation, right? Why is AI even being thought of in the context of being a person, within other conversations than this, obviously. It brings to mind for me a real brief anecdote from actually way back when I was in high school, if you can travel with me back, a solid 20 years at least. I took a philosophy class from a college professor who, one of the many things that we debated in that class was effectively not AI, but are computers alive? And his stance was, yes, because I don't tell the screensaver to come on, it comes on by itself. Therefore, the computer must have free thought, free will, whatever. And obviously, AI is a much more mature, different conversation to be had here. But it really, to me, feels like a very similar thought process, right? I don't really understand what's going on here, and I'm not going to claim to understand what's going on with AI, just like anybody who's not, actively developing it. But what I perceive is things are happening that I didn't ask it to do. It is mimicking human behavior. It is, generating things that I didn't tell it to do. So it is very natural, I think, for us to just kind of ascribe this, this must have intention. It must have rationality. It must have, deep insight that I don't actually have. And I think that's where we get into a lot of danger, right? The mimicry of those things, the ability to take in all of the world's data, more or less, and, sift it down to find those things that act as insight in other capacities, and then kind of reflect that back out within the specific conversation that you're having. That may really look, feel, and seem like deep insight, deep strategic thoughts to us as we're experiencing it. But I think it is really just a much more intricate version of the screensaver came on, right? It's very, very advanced at this point, but it's still mimicry. It's still something that's been predetermined to do based on algorithmic inputs that it's gotten, and so I think it is really important that we, as much as AI continues to look and feel and even act like humans going forward, because I'm sure we are 2 years into properly having ChatGPT as a tool, whatever it may be. That's only going to get more and more lifelike, because that's frankly what companies who are developing these tools want us to experience, right? The more that they can convince us this is an actual human, I can inject this into any and all of my processes and get the same high quality, probably even better result. That's how they're making money, right? So I think being just very clear-eyed about what the dynamics at play are is fundamental for us to understand how to treat it properly, right? So we need to understand it as a tool. It's just a very advanced tool. What does that have to do with the context of building products? So I think there's a knee-jerk reaction, right, amongst a lot of product leaders, a lot of companies, to say, oh, I'm seeing this generate things that look, probably higher quality than I'm getting from my junior product managers on my team, right? Let me just, or pick a role, honestly. Let me see if I can just replace that person with, ChatGPT, with some, mixture of AI, whatever it is, and I'm assuming that I'm going to get the best, ROI for my buck, based on that. What we're missing through all of that really is what actually makes good strategy, what actually makes good products, right? Fundamentally, those things are the result of seeing patterns and then breaking those patterns, right? It is at a fundamental level risk, right? And that is the one thing that, these LLMs that everybody's using, that, unless it's a very purpose-built AI, these generalized tools are frankly very bad at that, right? Because it is just antithetical to how they've actually been built, right? What they're doing is looking for commonalities. They're giving you, I've seen this thousands, millions, whatever times in my training set. Therefore, that gives me, high belief that this is the right answer. So that's why I'm seeing that thing. What we're looking for as strategists and as product leaders is, what am I seeing out there that's common, that I can then connect two dots that have never been connected before, right? And that may be minor. It may just be, okay, we can slightly position this product in a different way and have it better resonate with our audience. It may be major, right? Nobody's thought to apply this technology to that sector, right? But those are just not things that are going to show up with any prevalence in any data set that you could ever show in AI, right? And so we're just fundamentally not going to get that level of insight, that level of strategy from AIs up until the point where how they are built fundamentally changes, right?
Now, to be clear, like McKinsey put out a paper a while back, the state of AI in 2024, and in that they highlighted that strategy is all about pattern recognition and it's all about information synthesis, which is something that arguably and demonstrably AI is very, very good at. But you're saying that it's still not going to take the role of somebody who is capable of true strategy, because there is a human element that is missing from AI.
Yes. I mean, I'd say to some extent, at the risk of offending consultants everywhere, right? We do need to kind of check our sources on that one. That is a bit like, the company that's being paid to do a ton of consulting work at a very high rate saying, this is why you should pay us to do that work at a very high rate, right? I don't think that, McKinsey, any of these really top consulting companies are world renowned for innovation, right? They're renowned for the strategy and the playbook that they can bring in to ensure a good result, right? We've seen what good looks like. We can tell you how to do that here. But I think when we're talking about how do we come up with something new, something innovative, something that has not been done before, which frankly is, I think, more the mold that almost every tech company is really in, right? We're not looking for, I'm trying to build the next billion-dollar company by doing the exact same thing that everybody's already done before, just a slightly different way. It's right. It's a very different thought process to see a pattern, but then understand how to break it, than it is to see a pattern and understand how to rubber stamp it onto everything else, right? And I think this speaks a little bit to, kind of how we as product managers, leaders, strategists learn, right? Because I think at the very early stages, right, if I'm trying to replicate something or I'm trying to become original within a given space, like the initial steps arguably look very similar, right? I am trying to start by understanding what are the commonalities, what are the things that are deemed to be best practice. Well, how do things actually work, right, on a ground floor level, right? But as you move through that, when you're trying to innovate, what you're looking for is exceptions, right? I'm looking for the things that, okay, the process is supposed to act in XYZ way, but Janice over in accounting does it a completely different way. That's really interesting. Let me go talk to her, right? When I'm trying to innovate, that's critical, right? Because that's telling me the things that I can understand that are truly different or unique about how the company is operating, right? And those often spring up into being, really innovative and impactful ideas, right? If I'm trying to enforce a structure, I'm only visiting Janice to tell her to do it right, right? Like I don't really care what her unique insight is, right? Because that breaks the mold. If we're looking for efficiency, I need frameworks. If I'm looking for innovation, I need real cognitive ability to understand not just what works, but how to break it in a productive way, not just break it, period.
Emily, do you see pretty much the same thing from your experience when it comes to the difference between innovation and efficiency?
It makes total sense, Brian, that you don't want to necessarily use AI that's just repeating what it's already learned to try to find that kind of unique aspect.
And that was sort of the default setting of AI, right? To look at something and then replicate what it's seen. And it was one of the reasons why artists were so upset with AI, is because it was stealing their artwork. This was years ago still, but nonetheless, that part of the architecture still exists. I can't make something new. I can only look at everything else that's been created and then try to replicate that. And yeah, if you're trying to be innovative and you're trying to be different, then copying what someone else has already done probably isn't the best way to come up with new ideas. Brian, I'll tell you what, can you walk us through what does it look like when companies over-index on AI in the development process?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple typical signs to look for, right? If you're kind of questioning, am I working at that company or am I evaluating working at a company like that, right? One, you'd start to see a lot more emphasis on quantitative insight at the expense of qualitative, right? Companies, and you don't need AI to do this per se, but companies that really lean on automation and optimization as kind of their North Stars tend to look at, everything needs to get measured. And the way that I know I'm being successful is if I can, get an incremental 0.1% out of whatever the metric is, right? And that mentality just starts to creep into everything. So you kind of get these just swaths of reports that say, we've measured everything. The challenge that you get with that, that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. I worked for 7 years at Amazon. That's a lot of how we worked a lot of the time, right? There were giant reports that measured almost every aspect of the business. That in and of itself is not bad. It's the the kind of cultural weight that gets put on that over time, at least, unless you're very intentional about it, starts to indicate to people that the things that we're not measuring don't matter at all, right? I'm going to put all of my attention on the thing that my boss can actually look at, right? Because that is frankly how I'm getting gold in my job. And the expense of that is it's very difficult to measure how well do I understand my customer, right? A lot of that is kind of at a very messy, fuzzy, kind of part of the early process where, you have to be, a little bit aimlessly, honestly, talking to customers just to see what you can learn and then use that to direct, the further conversations. Listen to phone calls if you have a call center, watch some sessions about how they're clicking around your website, right? A lot of this is purely just, I'm going to engage with my customers to let them inform me what I should be looking at, not looking at a report to go, laser focus on one specific data point so then I can, check that box on whatever report I have, right? And I think when we amp that dynamic up with AI, right, I'm not even going to go listen to my calls. I'm going to dump all of them into ChatGPT, and then it's going to analyze all of them. And it's going to give me the summary of it. Okay, so now I have no idea what my customers are saying, right? I have this, 3-bullet summary. Do I know it's accurate? No. I'm just kind of taking that on faith because ChatGPT tends to, give good output, whatever it may be. So, it really becomes incredibly difficult to, truly understand your customers when you have that early data-driven, highly optimized environment, right? And again, I think to the point that Emily just made, that is where companies are largely injecting AI for the sake of efficiency to take those things that are messy and take a lot of time to do and try to automate them and make them super quick, right? But we're losing all the value of those when you do that.
Emily, I was going to ask you, and of course, we're going to not get anybody in trouble. So this might not be our company. This could be any company, whatever. The chase for the KPI, the chase for the OKR, whatever it is, the chase for the extra 1% or whatever it is for the sake of efficiency. Do you think that gets in the way of innovation sometimes, that we're using AI to try to be more efficient at the sake of giving up that individuality and that innovation that can only come from human insight and taking your time with it.
I do think there's still such value in, doing face-to-face interviews, getting on the phone, talking to customers, things of that nature to really understand the full capacity of, what their pain points are, what they're looking for in terms of, speeding up their workflow. So then taking that and, building it into your strategy. But I think there is a lot of pressure from, the top to make sure we're hitting certain goals. And so, people tend to just find ways that in maybe work that's more tedious to just speed it up so they can make sure they're hitting those certain metrics. So I think it's good to understand where you need that human intervention, like where you really need to build up, maybe your own knowledge versus where you can just do something quick with AI that might not impact things longer term.
I remember when this was long ago in my career, I was asked for every new product launch, I had to call a handful of people and just talk to them and talk to them about the product. And it was a very long process, but I only had to call like 20 people. And in that time, I would get 20 different insights about this product that we were putting together, how to market it, how to put it together. And that was a very, very human approach. But now I can use AI and its learning models. Instead of learning from 20 people, I'm learning from 10,000 people all at the same time. And it's gathering all this data information from all over the web. And it becomes which one of these was actually more effective in developing a better product.
Mm-hmm.
Was it when I just spoke to 20? Or was it when I'm now capable of speaking to 20,000, but it's all done through AI? So there's that wild trade-off there. I don't know which is truly more effective. I personally like to think that the human way of doing it is better, but I'm a little bit old school that way. The jury's out for me. What do you think?
I mean, I think if you can find ways to use AI to make the process faster, get better, more impactful insights out of it. Like I am all for that. I don't want to come off in any way as an AI naysayer, right? I think there's a lot of real value that can be extracted from AI if we can inject it in the right ways, right? And to me, what I would imagine that looking like, and maybe I'm just too limited in my imagination here, but would be, if I'm doing customer research or customer outreach in the way that you're describing, having AI as call it kind of a co-pilot to help me understand better contextually what I'm hearing from the people that I'm talking to, right? Somebody says something and it can, I'm just imagining things here, but automatically reference the concept they're talking about, give me some guidance on how to ask a question next that will extract more valuable insight, do sentiment analysis, things like that, right? I think all of those things are already implicitly being done, right? And it's kind of a measure just of how good are you at being a UX researcher or whatever the the other relevant job titles that do this might be. But the people that are really good at this are already taking in an immense amount of data that they may not even be aware of, right? But I've worked with really talented UX researchers who are able to, draw really keen insight from the fact that somebody paused in the middle of a sentence, right? And like, aha, I'm going to jump in there. Something is, mentally blocking them, right? I don't know that we are, when we're looking at AI as kind of a mass, application, efficiency tool, frankly, just going to build it in a way that's going to capture insights like that. Again, could be wrong here. And if I'm wrong, I'll be thrilled because that means that we can get all this rich insight in a way that actually is legitimately better and faster and, ideally cheaper. But I think when we're building for the broad case for everything, it is very, very, very difficult to go into the level of nuance that's required to capture, from user conversations, that level of actually insightful information, right? So for, the foreseeable future, while we are limited to our needs are, I really deeply need to understand my specific customers, right, or my target customers, the actual use cases of real people. Our best tool for taking all of that in is up here, right? It's my eyes, my ears, the fact that I can, observe not only just the literal things they're saying, but the way that they're saying it, the tonality, the pauses, all the context that we as humans have. I mean, we've literally matured for, I'm not going to claim to know however long the human race has been around, right? We are sensing machines, right? We're just not automated. That's really the difference. But, I think if we can build something that replicates my ability to take in all that information and think through it cognitively in the way that I can also do on the fly and speed that up, fantastic.
All right, I want to talk about frameworks. And you've mentioned that you're a bit anti-framework, or at least applying frameworks mindlessly, right?
Yeah.
Especially now that we've got these AI tools. And sometimes AI can provide you with a not so good framework or a not very good strategy, but it'll allow you to scale it very, very fast. So a bad decision can become a tremendously bad decision very, very fast. Can you share some of your take on why this deep customer insight needs to come first, and how product leaders can avoid the trap of just being misled and misapplying frameworks before they ever layer on any AI products or AI services?
Yep. Yeah. I'll just say a quick word first on, I don't know of a better term to use than anti-framework. I don't mean to say that all frameworks are bad. Anything like that. What I'm really cautioning against is coming into a situation which you have not thoroughly understood and starting to apply frameworks that may have worked in other contexts without understanding necessarily what made them successful and whether those same underlying criteria are true within the new, the new space that you're moving into, right? And that is where I've seen a lot of product leaders, and I'll lump myself into that category early in my career as well, start to go wrong, right? Where it's, coming with statements like, well, here's how we did things at Amazon. It's like, okay, that's great. That worked there for specific reasons, right? If you don't understand what those reasons are, and you don't know how to translate those to whatever company you're now working at, it doesn't matter how good the strategy is going to fail because the underlying conditions are different, right? And I think this is where, again, kind of mindlessly applying AI, it starts to really fracture that dynamic in an even bigger way because you're applying it much more broadly and much faster, right? So AI can take any situation you give it and apply any number of either fundamentally basic or arguably advanced frameworks to something, but there's really no way to understand whether it actually has gone through all of the kind of underlying criteria and selected the right framework, right? So even approaching your product innovation, your product strategy from the standpoint of frameworks, I think is a little bit problematic if that's where you stop, I guess, put it that way. I think frameworks can help get the thought process going, but if you're not moving fairly rapidly to a point where you've effectively discarded the framework and you're now talking about a very kind of bespoke solution for the space that you've thoroughly mapped out, then I think you're frankly not likely to come up with anything truly strategic or truly innovative. So I think using AI as a thought partner to get you started there, right? Maybe dumping in, here's the situation that I'm in, here are the criteria that I can at least define at this time. What are some frameworks that I can think about using to start my thought process? Like, fine, I'm all for that, right? Like using it as a thought partner, I think makes a ton of sense. Saying, tell me using Porter's 5 forces what I should do right now, like that I think is a very dangerous misuse of it, right? One of the things that we've seen, fairly repeatedly, and I think this was really obviously egregious recently with kind of the sycophancy problem that OpenAI had with one of their recent releases was unless you tell it to, the AI is not going to tell you that something's wrong, right? It agrees to everything and it always knows everything, right? So even to get to the point of saying, is this the right framework? Are you applying it correctly? How do I know that this is even a valid thought process? Like that takes a lot of work. And I think, frankly, a lot of the time people skip that work because it's just like, yeah, that looks good. It's better than I could have thought of. But it doesn't matter if it looks better, right? The devil's in the details of, have you actually mapped out the problem space correctly? And have you thought through everything that is essential to actually finding the right solution, not just kind of rubber stamping something that works in a lot of other companies, so it must work here.
Emily, what are your thoughts on that?
I was thinking through because I think frameworks in general, I think a lot of people think they're great in business. And again, just going back to that efficiency piece, like if we have a framework, we can apply it to every single situation. And so it's just interesting to hear the perspective of maybe there's a gap in there, or maybe something's not working with the framework and you're actually kind of just making the problem bigger because you keep using the same one. So I think it's made me actually think about, when I put together like go to market plans for, these new products, working with the product managers, we try to have a framework, but just kind of thinking, is that the right way to do it? I think, there's always improvements, or there's just a lot of differences with product launches. So yeah, it kind of just gave me something to think about and possibly revisit.
Yeah. One thing I would add is, there's a concept of, I'm probably going to butcher the way this is said, so I apologize in advance, but Shuhari, which is a concept in Japanese martial arts, and it kind of just describes the stages of learning. So Shu is basically like, I'm understanding, just kind of the moves without necessarily how to link them together. That's kind of where a lot of people start out in their career. Like, how do I generate a report? Okay, I do that, right? The Ha phase is I start to link everything together. I understand kind of the fundamentals and how the system works. And then Re, I think, is the really important phase for innovation, which is I transcend the system, right? I have ingrained everything so deeply. I understand how things work that I can now do things differently from the system. I can, effectively operate without frameworks. I think that is where we really should, aim to get to as certainly as product leaders. And I think, a lot of the time, if you think back, for me, it was certainly early in my career, watching some of the product leaders that I worked under, people who, can kind of just sit in a meeting and be like, ask whatever this super relevant question is that nobody thought of before, or, come up with this, amazing insight that they'd only been thinking about the problem for 5 minutes. Like that to me is like the evidence of being at that level of mastery, right? It's not because they went through exactly the same thought process that you did and, tease it out and then, and did all that way faster and just suddenly came to a different answer. It's because it's pattern recognition, right? I've seen all these things before. Here are the things that I need to probe at. Did you think about this? Okay, right. And they can do that super quickly because they've seen, thousands of those situations, whatever. But I think also critically have approached it from a lens of, I'm trying to learn how things work, not how to do a specific task, right? So, I think, getting a level deeper on frameworks, really strong strategists, really strong product leaders, they're using frameworks. They're all just very subconscious, right? And when you bring it up to the conscious level, that's actually where it starts to be a little bit less impactful for driving true innovation, right? When it sinks down into the subconscious and you can start to think creatively without the restraint of that conscious framework, right? That's where a lot of the really unique and interesting insights come from.
I spoke with somebody earlier who had talked about AI being far too agreeable. And he had an incredible example. He said that he was working on a project. He needed to give the project a title. He had asked AI, please evaluate this title. Let me know what you think. And then he copied it and he went to hit Control V, missed Control and just hit Shift. So it was just the capital letter V. And AI then told him all the ways why the letter V was the greatest title ever. And this title was going to be. And at that point, he realized, okay, you are just telling me what I want to hear. You're not giving me any real criticism, any kind of feedback that I can actually utilize. When you turn that into strategy for building a framework for an enterprise, then you can see how this can suddenly spiral into something very, very bad, where you've built something that you think works, and the AI just agrees with you and says, yep, that's the best project I've ever seen. I can't wait to see you do this. And it could have holes all over it.
Yep. Sorry, I was going to say, I think a lot of us, myself included, have worked at companies that already operated that way pre-AI. It's the place where, well, you don't tell the CEO their idea is stupid. Like, you just do it, right? Those are not good companies.
Oh, I can.
Right?
No. I think that's how all the recent Disney movies have been made, and that's why they are all flopping. But that's a whole other conversation. What I wanted to say about it was that was the interpretation of AI when he first started working on it. Today, whatever updates they've made, whatever new innovations that have come along, now his AI is much more conscious of good decision versus bad decision, and it's not afraid to tell him and say, this is not a good idea,
Yeah.
or this is not the right route you should take. You should try something else. I tried it on my own and gave it some ideas, including one that I knew was a terrible idea, just to see what would happen. And sure enough, it came back and said, I do not recommend this. And it gave me reasons as to why. So that makes me wonder about the future of AI and what's going to happen within product management in just a couple of months from now. I guess we're going to be up to Chat GTP 5, I guess. Google just released their new one as of the recording, I think yesterday. So we're advancing very, very quickly in AI. So in a year, what's that going to look like?
So, I mean, I think, again, this may be an area where, we kind of have to refer back to the my screensaver came on concept, right? AI doesn't have a personality, right? These are all things that have been constructed into it by, the companies that are making them. You could also, if there was a lot of customer demand for it, have an AI that disagreed with everything you said, right? The reason that they are agreeing with us historically, I would say, really is because that's by and large what people want, right? I don't want to be told I'm an idiot. I want to be told that my ideas are great. And that is what's helping them sell more subscriptions, right? And obviously they crossed the line a little bit, recently with that, at least with respect to OpenAI, and people got really turned off by the fact that, it's telling me everything I'm doing is amazing, right? So there's a line, right? There's a bandwidth that they have to stay in. But the reality is, like, if we wanted a business facing AI that had zero personality or was constructively critical of everything, like, all of these are things that we can program in, right? And frankly should, right? And I would say for my personal use, and I would really advocate for really anybody who has a serious intent to use AI productively should do something similar, right? Is create your own instance and tell it to forget this, sycophantic, happy, personality that it's been given, and like actually be a thought partner for me, which means, tell me when I'm being stupid, tell me the things I don't know. Like, the less you can get your feelings hurt by a tool, like hopefully the better off you'll be. Where does this take us in a year? I think, good PMs. Well, I don't want to put it that way. Right? That's a little bit too binary, right? PMs who are successful in understanding how to use AI, PM orgs, companies, et cetera, I think are going to be very purpose specific about how they're implementing it, right? I'll contrast that to some of the companies I've worked with, some of the companies I'm working with actively right now, have these kind of just broad AI mandates. And the way that comes across is everything we're building has to have an AI feature. And it's just, that is going to be so counterproductive, at least in the short term, because throwing ChatGPT into every tool that you build is just going to yield, kind of a okay, not great, layer on top of whatever was initially being built, right? And I think that may seem cool and exciting, particularly because a lot of people, we're in tech. Like, we've seen a lot of this done, a lot of for several years at least. But a lot of people who are kind of in the more remote areas from tech are just seeing ChatGPT for the first time, within the last month, right? And so all this is, probably going to get adopted because it's cool, shiny, hip, makes you feel like you're on the cutting edge of technology. But I think realistically, a year from now, probably none of those tools are actually going to get used, or at least not to the extent that they were, pictured, because chucking this capability onto every single thing that you're building is just going to add an additional, surface area that needs to be maintained, that is going to detract from the other features that you've intentionally built into the tool. I don't think it's going to be a net positive, frankly. It's going to be something that kind of erodes trust and usage of these tools. Again, getting back to where I think people will be successful, not this kind of broad, chuck AI into everything mandate, but rather being very specific about breaking each, role or product that they're building or process into what are the things that have defined outcomes, and we know what good looks like, right? I can define not only, what high quality output looks like, but how to get to it, right? Those are things that, pre-AI, we would say, largely speaking, could be automated, right? And now I think the window of automation, if you will, has gotten broader because we can take things that are not purely in code or purely expressed as logic and, start to express them more in verbal terms or writing, right? But still, you're communicating logic at a very fundamental level. And if you can carve those things out and hand them over to AI, right, that is where ideally it can get both a really high quality result because you've been very prescriptive about how to do that and what that looks like, and it can do it much faster than a human, right? And that will enable PMs, orgs, strategists to then start. Hopefully, this is what I'm knocking on wood for, but spending a lot more of their time thinking about the actual strategy component of the thing, talking to customers more, like doing the parts that are really hard to automate, that have always kind of gotten shunted to the side because, gosh, I don't have time for that. Like let's bring those to the forefront and like spend real time on them now. Because if we can do that, then I feel very, very confident about the quality of the products that we're going to collectively be building in the future.
I remember when I used AI recently to, I think I used it to help me with a report. And I also used it recently to help me figure out a routine for the gym. And as I was putting it together, I realized it's probably going to give me something good because I am not the first person to want exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right. There's been plenty of people who've asked for exactly what I'm asking for, and I just want what worked for them. I want to do that.
Mhm.
And therein lies the problem. There is nothing intuitive. There's nothing innovative about what I just did.
Yep.
I simply want what has worked for others, and now I want to do that too.
Yep.
And I think when it comes to projects like that, AI is probably fantastic. You can start with AI, ask it the basic questions, and whatever it generates is probably going to be pretty useful to you. But if you're trying to come up with something new and original, you're truly trying to be innovative, then AI first is probably not going to be the best route for you.
Definitely agree.
Emily, what have you got for us?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I was thinking about was also when you're building the strategy and thinking of kind of the long term of it is people have found it very difficult to really measure AI and how it's actually helping their business, what the ROI is of it. So I really think another aspect, like you said, instead of just like building AI into every single aspect of your product and all these different tools, is kind of really trying to think farther out as, when people are using this, when leaders are making or decision makers are deciding if they're going to buy this, are they going to see clear value of it? Or is it just going to be, another AI component that everyone else already has? So yeah, again, I think it just goes back to you need that human kind of touch at the beginning to figure out like what is actually going to move the needle for these people in their work, so they'll actually see the value in it and not just like throwing it at everything, which yeah, I mean, so many things have AI at this point, and like, are people using it? Do they know how to use it? Are they using it? Is it actually adding value? I think is still kind of something to be answered.
Yeah, I think we have to be a little bit realistic about how much of this usage is being driven by, kind of FOMO on a corporate level. Really a lot of time, board pressure of we can't be the last company to use AI, so you need to have a mandate and you need to inject it, right? But it's not a pull model, right? It's not I'm saying I have a really complicated problem that I have not been able to figure out, and the only tool that I have left in my tool belt is AI. So let's bring that in and use that to solve it. Right? It is very much a push model of, well, okay, my investor said that I have to do this, so let's go out into the company and find all the areas that we could possibly inject AI and replace humans, or whatever the framing is. To a large extent, I mean, when you look at it that way, you're probably taking whatever was on your roadmap, which hopefully was thoughtfully planned out up until that point, and saying, none of that matters. We're throwing it all out, right? What we're going to do instead is re-architect the entire company, assume that everything's going to work just fine, faster, even better, as soon as we do all this work, and then get back to doing what we were doing before, right? Which, having been through reorgs and things of that nature repeatedly, obviously, in my career, that is a very optimistic take. Let's put it that way. I think we're going to see certainly value, right, coming down the pipeline from AI in a corporate setting. But I cannot in full faith believe that it's going to be within the next, honestly, 1 to 5 years. I think there's going to be a lot of churn, a lot of kind of companies experiencing, hey, we're not getting the results that we thought we were going to get, pulling back, and then maybe thoughtfully reinvesting down the road. But I think, like all these hype cycles, we're at the early stages still, and all this competition amongst all the different AI companies is continuing to ramp it up, if anything. But I really I don't think that we're actually at the point where it's truly going to yield the value that it's promising to yield. And one last data point I'll just throw out. I did a survey to a bunch of tech leaders. This was in January or February of last year, right? So even earlier, right, in the kind of the LLM hype cycle. And at that point, I think it was something like 70% of the respondents, and these are executive level people within these companies, to be clear, said that they believed that they were not just behind their peers in terms of implementing AI, but very far behind their peers, right? And at that point, it was like, okay, we've had 6-12 months tops to implement anything. Like, how could you possibly be very behind, right? It was very clearly this much more of a feeling and less of a reality. And I think we're still very much trapped in that.
Brian Root, Fractional Chief Product Officer and Product Strategist, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Emily, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.